welcome to those of you watching us online. I'm told that 130 people watched last week's online, so either at the time or more probably later. So a very warm welcome to you, and also to anybody here, and I know there are some for the first time. As I said last time, this shouldn't be me, but the really good news is that Danny is making extremely good progress. He was discharged from hospital last Thursday. Angela has made it very clear to him that we don't want him back until he feels fit, and he's got to recuperate properly. But she seems to be having regular texts and Zooms and so on from him. So he is very much on the mend. Harvey, who is our speaker for this series, needs no introduction, but those of us who were here last week really, really appreciated what you said. And so we look forward to the second soundtrack for Lent, the world's soundtrack.
You will hear me if I'm speaking at this level. That's lovely, good. Thank you so much, Doreen, and it's really lovely to see everybody. Thank you so much for coming again tonight. And as Doreen has mentioned, this is the second in our series when we're going to be looking at the world and the sound of the world, whereas last week we were thinking very much about our own sounds, our own bodies and the sounds that we make as individuals. Now we're opening things right up to the whole universe. So I'm inviting you to think big. And the next slide, please, Glenn. While that's getting ready, I will just remind everybody, if you were here last week, that the thrust of our conversations has been inspired by a little book called Honest to God. So not only are we thinking about a huge universe tonight, we're also thinking about how God is understood in our universe. Can we have that picture, please, Glenn? Well, while we're waiting for the picture, can I just ask you, can anybody remember the name J.B. Phillips? Yes. He wrote a book with the title, Your God is Too Small. So I want to reiterate that tonight. John Robinson, in his book, Honest to God, 61 years ago, said you've got to think carefully about how you understand God. I'm sure he would want to say that we need to expand our understanding. And I want to ask you to expand your understanding of the world. How are we doing, Glenn? Well, I'll have to go on without the pictures. I wonder if you can imagine. Good, right, okay, good. Now the next one, please. Good. Hoorah, lovely. Now, can you see that? This is an attempt visually to help us to expand our understanding of the universe. We've all lived through these recent days when our perception of the universe in which we live is getting larger and larger and more mysterious and more extraordinary and more beautiful and more wonderful. The next one, please. There's just another image for us to ponder while I'm trying to put my thoughts together, to say we think about the universe in mental terms. How does it look? How does it work? What are the origins of our universe? What I'm aiming at tonight is to ask you to think about what it sounds like. What does the universe that we know about, what does it sound like? We have a hymn in our Methodist hymn book that has a line, a sound of God comes to my ears. Do you hear a sound of God when you contemplate the universe in which you live? When we were in COVID lockdown, I think my hearing got a little bit more acute. We began to hear the birds in the universe. We began to see and hear things that have always been there, but we've never really paid much attention. So that's the slide I wanted to look at now. Now, can we move it on to the next one, Glenn, please? Yes, now, this says, the world is alive with the sound of music. Oh, right, so this is ready. Oh, that's lovely. Thank you very much. Now, with this image, I'm hoping to say to you that if you think about the universe in terms of sound, there's an enormous amount of music as well. I've been greatly struck recently, in fact in 2018, when the end of the First World War was commemorated in our village in Shepherd's Well, somebody was telling us that people at the time, particularly the mothers, the wives, and the children in Shepherd's Well, could hear the fighting in the Somme. So, being in Shepherd's Well, they could actually hear what was going on. I want to ask you to start thinking about the things that we hear now. I'm deeply troubled by the way in which we are sometimes affected by all the sounds of our refugees crossing the English Channel. We don't hear their cries. We hear political arguments. We don't hear so much sound that's coming out of the world. And somebody also said to me, when it snows, it's a rare occurrence nowadays, you can hear the silence. So what I'm beginning to try and get at tonight is to try and get some acute listening going on, some attunement to the possibility that the universe has got so much sound that we need to pay attention to. Many of the sounds are terror-struck, I think. The sound of climate change, of ice melting, the sound of cries for people living with famine and poverty, let alone the struggles of the people in Gaza tonight, and the people in Ukraine, and the Sudan, and Afghanistan, and going on and on. We have so many, but do we hear the sounds of these horrors? And equally, do we hear the joys? Do we hear the bird songs? Do we listen for these things? These are all part of my background questioning. And when we put this slide up, the world is alive with the sound of music. Well, there's so much music in the world, it seems to me. Some people have said that the universe makes music. Do you remember the Psalm number 19? The heavens are telling the glory of God. Do the heavens sing to us? But we certainly have iPhones, gaming, pop culture, concerts, music. Wherever you go, you've got some sound going on. And we need to ask ourselves, where is God in all this? Let's see if we can move on. Oh, that's going backwards. Ha ha! Look at that. There's so much sound in the universe. I'd like to ask the question, what do you think music is for? If you go along with the thought that music has been created by God, what's it for? Do you know the story of the little boy who was shown round the Vatican in Rome, and the guide who was showing him all around the Vatican, the family was shown all these wonderful treasures that belonged to the Vatican. And the guide was saying what various things were for, what this bishop's cope was for, what this chalice was for, what all these beautiful paintings were for. And then later in the day, the Pope himself came to meet all the people in Vatican Square. And this little boy broke ranks and ran up to him and dug him in his cassock, and he said, "And what are you for?" I'd love to know the answer, wouldn't you? What's music for? Any ideas? I think if you were King Saul, you would say, "It will soothe my troubled breast." Come on, little David, play on your harp and soothe my troubled breast. Does music block out the terror of the world? Or is it basically entertainment? I thought this slide, by the way, was worth throwing in, courtesy of one of our friends. I thought that was good. The earth without art is just, eh? So I hope I'm beginning to get you into the zone of thinking about the artistic aspect of creation. Some philosophers have described music in different ways. One philosopher says it's audible cheesecake. I think, well, our son said that would be a great name for a pop group. Or sonic wallpaper, how about that? How often do you really listen to music, or do you just like to have it in the background? It helps you to get on with things. Is music entertainment? Is that what it's for? Is it to entertain us? Well, I don't think so. I think it has to be much more than that. Here's a quotation that I love. Is not the content of art that is the real concern of art, but the kind of looking and the kind of listening to the world which it brings to us. Right, so let's go on. I want to move on to our second theme of our talk tonight. And I'd like to ask us about God in creation. How do you think God really fits? If we understand God as the origin of music and the origin of the world and all the sounds of the universe, what kind of God is that? I want to throw in the very serious suggestion. I'd like you to think about God as a musician. This is a metaphor, but it's a metaphor that I think has great strength. A composer, someone who creates music. I want to show you a picture out of respect of somebody who I met. His name is Jonathan Harvey, and he lived in Lewes in Sussex, next door to Colin Morris. And he recently died, but Jonathan Harvey has written lots and lots of music, very difficult to understand, very modern, using computers and all kinds of sounds in the world around us. The remarkable thing about Jonathan Harvey is that as a person, when you met him in the flesh, in his body, he exuded grace and beauty and love. Now I want to come to the main thrust of what I want to say tonight. I want to introduce you to two people, Eric Fenby on the left and Frederick Delius. Eric Fenby was my teacher at the Royal Academy of Music in 1964. In 1928, he was very troubled to learn about a composer called Frederick Delius. Because in 1928, Delius was so ill that he was paralyzed and unable to write down any of the music that was in his heart. And Eric Fenby, a young man at the time, decided he would take the plunge and write to this composer who was living in Fontainebleau in France and said, "Can I be of any help?" And Delius, his wife, wrote back and said, "Yes, come on the next train." And for the next 6 years, this young man, Eric Fenby, became the scribe for Frederick Delius. I'm telling you this story because last week I was telling you about going back to school to learn the violin. This week, I want this to be a focus because of the nature of God in this experience that Eric Fenby had with Frederick Delius. When Delius first met Eric Fenby, it was very difficult for Eric Fenby, you can imagine. But what really troubled Eric Fenby and really motivated him was that he felt that there must be so much beauty in the body of this man paralyzed here. But to have that beauty inside you that you cannot actually express and put down on paper, what a terrible tragedy that is. And I've been wrestling over the last 50-odd years with this question. Could it be that God has so much beauty that he wants to give to the world, but there is some need that has to be unlocked so that that beauty can be shared and understood and expressed? If you ever get the chance of reading a book called Delius as I Knew Him, written by Eric Fenby, I'd love to encourage you to read it. When Eric Fenby first met him, he was confronted by this old man who said, "Are you ready, Fenby?" And he said, "Yes, sir." And Delius apparently threw his head back and went, "La, la, 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 la." Have you got that? And la, 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 and he was doing it. There's been a film made of this, by the way, by Ken Russell. You can see that. It's called Song of Summer. And poor Eric Fenby just broke down in tears. And he said, "But Delius, what key is it in?" And he said, "Oh, it's in A minor." And Mrs. Delius came in the room and he said to his wife, "This boy is no good. He doesn't even know the key that I'm telling him to play." And this is the outcome of that first meeting. I'll play the tune on the fiddle first and then try and play the piano bit. It goes something like this. Have you got that? Can you imagine? Can you imagine? But this is the final thing. I put up on the screen Eric Fenby's handwriting. I don't know if you can see that. That's another piece that he was able to write down. I found this so inspiring. But this is how it worked. This is the finished product. Can you imagine a young man being able to extract that out of a paralyzed man? I found that extraordinary. And as the years developed and continued with these two, they talked about God so many times. Frederick Delius was a great advocate of a philosopher who was very popular in continental Europe. His name was Friedrich Nietzsche. And Nietzsche was well known at the beginning of the 20th century as the person who said famously, "We have killed God. We, the human race, have killed God." And as a consequence, the traditional Christian church has dismissed Nietzsche as being a troublemaker, causing difficulties for the whole world, because he suggested that God is dead. And yet I can't help thinking of the fact that we worship Jesus Christ, who has died for us. How does that fit into our understanding of God, the creator, the composer of the universe in which we live? One of the questions that Delius put to Eric Fenby, who incidentally was a very faithful Roman Catholic layman, Delius put this question to him. He said, at breakfast one morning, "Fenby, what about this earthquake in Lisbon in 1755, when 12,000 people died? Where's your God in all that?" What do you think this poor young lad, he'd been subjected to this horrific experience of trying to write down the music, this beauty of music, and now is confronted by that sort of question. What does he make of all of that? And I want to say to you that I think we need to face up to our questions. How do we face the question of the horrific problems that our world is enduring at this time? Where is God in all of it? Are we asking that question? Do you ever ask yourself that question? I just want to pose that. Do we ever wrestle with that question? There's an image of Friedrich Nietzsche. That moustache doesn't make you warm to him, but there he is. But he had a troubled life as well, but he was a genius. And I've got this, you see, I'm wrestling with this thing. I've got something in me that wants to try and get to the root of what this man is trying to say. One commentator said that the English have never really had much sympathy for German philosophy. We find it difficult and heavy and sometimes not really related to our world. But I've got this niggling thing that Nietzsche was onto something. He was beginning to help the world to really come to grips with what John Robinson later in 1963 asked, "What are the depths of your life? Is God there, or are you looking for God somewhere outside of you to conform to your feelings?" Oh, that other person, by the way, Jan van Ruysbroek. Has anybody heard of him? He was a Flemish mystic at the time when a wonderful English mystic was writing The Cloud of Unknowing. I wonder, some of you will have come across that at the time of the plague. And Jan van Ruysbroek is a person that Eric Fenby was deeply, deeply devoted to. and he was trying to respond to Delius's questions and his atheism by saying, there is a great mystery, Delius, but I can't put it into words. I've put Wrestling Jacob up there. I don't know if you can see that picture. This is by Rembrandt. It's a painting of the story that you'll find in the book of Genesis in chapter 22. Do you remember the story of Jacob wrestling all through the night, and he didn't know who he was wrestling with? And I just want to put this to you, that if I'm being honest about God with you tonight, I want to say that it's very often a wrestling match, because there are so many questions that I really can't get an answer to, and I'm finding more and more questions coming into view. My superintendent minister, when I began my ministry, or before I began my ministry, was a minister called Frank Thewlis. And Frank Thewlis was a great mission preacher. And he told the story, and I think it's a little bit of a myth, but it's a lovely story. He arrived at an evening service in the Yorkshire Dales for the Methodist evening service. 6:30, that's the usual time, I think, for evening services. And he arrived in this chapel, and there was nobody there, but the boiler was on. So that's a good clue. He must have been expected. The fire was on. The hour of 6:30 arrived, and nobody had arrived, so he went into the vestry, wondering if the steward was on duty. Nobody in the vestry. So as it was 6:30, he came out of the vestry and went into the pulpit and announced the hymn. The first hymn by Charles Wesley. Come, O thou traveller unknown, whom yet I hold but cannot see. My company before has gone, and I am left alone with thee. And then he noticed there was an organist up there. There's an organist at the organ loft. With thee all night I mean to stay and wrestle till the break of day. And she said, not on your life, I'm off. Dear friends, do we wrestle with our perception of our metaphysical God? We've inherited something from the time of the Enlightenment, which has made God into a mechanic. There was somebody called Paley who had this idea that God was like a great watchmaker who put all the intricate bits of the universe together into a watch, wound it all up, and there is your universe. And I sometimes think that might have been the kind of universe that Delius understood and felt that we had killed it and we need to be rid of it. I'm wanting to say and labor the point that the creation of the world is an active, living being. In the way that a composer writes their music, they are wanting to express themselves in what they write, or a poet in what they write in their poetry are trying to convey their very being. It's something that is active. It's not a machine of any kind. Somebody recently has written a book about music and saying we want to get rid of the word music and put the word musicking. This is the idea of saying that music has to be made, has to be active. It's not an object. Music is not an object any more than the Bible is not an object. The Bible and music have to be played, have to be performed. You might recognize the one on the left. That's me. The lady in the middle is called Roberta Rominger. She was a United Reformed Church moderator. And on the right is another Methodist minister, John Swarbrick. And we formed a musical group some years ago, and we had the name Parsons Noise. Thought it was rather good. And we often talk together about what's called perichoresis. Now, here's a great word. Choresis is like the chorus of a ballet. Peri, together. When the Greeks started to formulate an understanding of the Trinity, what God is like as Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, they said that the persons of the Trinity danced together. That God is a dancer, and his nature is in relationships, dancing together. When the Latin, the Roman Church, translated the Greek perichoresis, they said that the persons of the Trinity sat together. Sat together. And we've inherited that. I'll sit this one out when it comes to trying to understand God as Holy Trinity. I must move on quickly, because I now want to ask you to take the word kenosis seriously. In the New Testament, there are just one or two passages which are what we call kenotic. The kenotic theory describes our approach to God as the one who empties himself into the universe. Can you read what it says there? I must put my glasses. I should be able to remember it. If I can remember that Wesley hymn, I ought to remember this. Let the same mind be in you that was in Christ Jesus, who, though he was in the form of God, did not regard equality with God as something to be exploited, but emptied himself, taking the form of a slave, being born in the likeness of humanity. Let's go back to Eric Fenby for a moment. I want to suggest to you that he poured himself out in what he was trying to do with Delius. I understand that Eric Fenby had 2 mental breakdowns during this period of working with this composer, trying to bring out the beauty. He poured himself out. Do you know this hymn? And can it be? You know that one? We sing it with great gusto, and one of the lines we sing is this: he left his Father's throne above, so free, so infinite his grace, emptied himself of all but love, and bled for Adam's helpless race. We sing that, and I'm not convinced that people ask themselves, what does that mean? That Christ has emptied himself. One way of getting at it, I've talked about him. Those are just that was an etching of Eric Fenby in 1930. That's what he looked like. A painter called James Gunn. I don't know if you've heard of him. But that on the right is the man who was my teacher. That's what he looked like. I can remember him. I hope you can read that. There's a painting here that we looked at last week. But here's a poem by R.S. Thomas, a memory of Kreisler. Kreisler was a famous Austrian violinist and medical doctor. Incidentally, he wrote his music while he was in the trenches in the First World War, fighting for Austria. A memory of Kreisler once at some recital in this same city. I think the city is Cardiff. The seats all taken, I found myself pushed onto the stage with a few others, so near that I could see the toil of his face muscles a pulse like a moth fluttering under the fine skin and the indelible veins of his smooth brow. I could see, too, the twitching of the fingers, caught temporarily in art's neurosis as we sat there or warmly applauded this player who so beautifully suffered for each of us upon his instrument. So it must have been on Calvary, in the fierce light of the thorn's halo, the men standing by, and that one figure, the hands bleeding, the mind bruised but calm, making such music as lives still, and no one daring to interrupt, because it was himself that he played, and closer than all of them, the God listened. Do you see what I'm trying to get at, folks? Here is the God we worship and adore, who's poured himself out onto the universe in the way a violinist pours their very life into their music making. I must go on next to the next one. Now, this is where the theme changes a little bit, because what I'm wanting to say about our creation and our world, our wonder of the world, I want to try and share with you what another German thinker has helped me with. His name is Paul Tillich, and he has said that Jesus Christ came to the world and is in the world as a new being, as a new creation. I mentioned recently in a sermon that one of my theology teachers said, don't forget that when Jesus was bleeding and dying and suffering at the cross, he was enduring the birth pangs of a new world. He was giving birth to a new creation. So Christ is not the founder of a religion. He has actually done away with religion, as Bonhoeffer would want to say. And we have a new world, a new universe. And this new universe is God's love. And I'm going to come on to try and describe the bits of that new world. So if there's a new being, could it be, if you're with me, I hope you are, that could this new being have a new sound? Is there a sound of this new being? What does Jesus Christ, risen and ascended, sound like? It's not just about what did his voice sound like when he was walking this earth, but what does Jesus Christ, who we worship and adore today, how does he sound to you? What's his music? I wrote this down, and I found I just had to put it down. Christ's life, death, and resurrection is a concert performance of God's abundant and steadfast love song. It's the latest hit parade. The whole of Jesus Christ is the sound of God's love, I propose to you. I'm thinking aloud, really. An unending stream, an ever-flowing love song in the universe. Does that make sense? I love this quotation. I've renewed a friendship with somebody recently, and he wrote this: we need to displace the idea of art as a kind of description or saying or an object, and replace it with the idea of art as a kind of appearing. A kind of appearing. Art as a kind of appearing. Music as something that appears. is given to us. Not so much a saying or a description or a definition or an object. And Jesus Christ brings that to the world. I'm going to skip these ones because I haven't got time to go into this, but I wanted to give you an idea of how my mind was working. When I was younger, I was enthralled by the technical, musical way of understanding a symphony. And a symphony would be made up of what they call the exposition, the first theme. And then there would be a development. And then there would be a recapitulation. These are lots of big words tonight. You will forgive me. But there was a very early Christian called Saint Irenaeus. And he said that Jesus Christ recapitulated the life of Adam. What he meant by that is that Adam was given free will and he messed it up. The human race messed up the use of freedom. And Jesus Christ came to redeem the human race and put it right. And he did this by going back over all the sins that Adam had committed and replayed them and remade them. I'm wanting to try and say to you that Jesus Christ is a symphony in sonata form. He has recapitulated and brought these things back to us. I realize that's a bit of a technical problem, and so I must try and put it in a better way. This is my final thrust that I want to offer tonight. It might take a few moments to look at it. You know, we started our talk last week by reminding ourselves that our circuit, our Methodist circuit, is going through a period of review and asking questions about our future. I want to suggest to you that our understanding of evangelism needs to bring in this new world. We need to look in new ways, and we need to hear the song of God's love in Jesus Christ in new ways. I do believe with all my heart that we have abused the words around evangelism. We talk about, is that person an evangelical? Is that person a Bible-believing Christian? Is the church being truly rooted to its evangelical roots? I want to ask a far more important question. How are we honest about our evangelism today? And here are the things. First of all, I want to suggest to you that the new world that Jesus Christ brings to us is a new understanding of time. We are living in a new time. Christ has brought a new time where past and future hopes are lived out in the present time. We are obsessed with things about the past, aren't we? Look at family history. It's become, ancestry has become not only a hobby, it's become an industry. What are people trying to find by looking into their roots? I'm as guilty as anybody. I love it, trying to find out whose skeleton is in my cupboard. But we are almost obsessed by our history. So obsessed that we keep saying, can we get back to before the Big Bang? Can we really get back? That people have given their lives to this, wondering about the past. And they don't really put as much emphasis upon their energy towards living in the present, which in itself must have some sort of effect about the way we view the future. Another philosopher called Henri Bergson, said there are two faces to time. The first face of time is objective time, where you have a clock, where you have calendars and train timetables. The second, in the French language, durée, duration, which is lived time, the time of our experience, the time felt, lived, and acted. Look at the way Jesus Christ lived his time from the records we have. This is the way that we are to live in new time. Secondly, we must, in our evangelism, stay in tune. Oh dear, when I play my fiddle, before I went back to have lessons recently, I got very lazy about tuning up my fiddle because I wasn't very good at making sure it was properly in tune. That's the note A. Can you hear how the sound waves are fluctuating? The only way to know whether it's in tune is to play another note. That sounds reasonably okay. That's the way we test it, by playing another note. If you played the very bottom note on a piano keyboard and you went right through properly in tune with every key, you'd be out of tune at the top. This is what's called a well-tempered piano. It's been tempered. And we need to be in tune with ourselves. I think this is a key issue of our evangelism. The Pope has recently said that humanity is out of tune with itself, is full of anxiety about the world, doesn't know what to do. And we have been given a music, a song that will enable us to be in tune. I believe this is terribly important. We need to ask ourselves today, am I truly in tune with myself? And am I in tune with the world, the universe around me? Oh, no. Sing the melody. Sing the melody. I hope you've caught my vision and my hearing of a melody of love. I believe that there is a mystery and a wonder of love that is at the heart of the universe. And we are being invited to join that song, to join in that music. You might say to me, oh, I'm not a musician, I can't sing, I can't do that. I'm not talking about technical musical ability. I'm talking about sharing in the gift of God's love, and to sing it, and to enjoy it, and to share in it. We talked last week about the cantus firmus that Bonhoeffer spoke of, that with love there is a melody that is given to the world, if only we could hear it and share in it more and resonate with the world. Listen to the harmony. Listen to the harmony. You know that harmony is a musical technical word where a number of notes are played together. You remember this passage. There is neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male nor female, for you are one in Christ Jesus. There, St. Paul is speaking about the differences, the edgeless differences and diversity of the human race and reality, and they need to be played together. We need to be much more acute to this new harmony that Jesus Christ brings, where he recognizes everyone as free and loved and of equal love by God. That leads me to just go to this one. I want to share you this, something another that I've found very passionate over the years. Arnold Schoenberg. Does that name ring bells with you? Does it fill you with excitement? No. He is greatly misunderstood. Colin Morris once said to Jonathan Harvey, his neighbour, he said, I don't know why you go in for all this awful stuff by Arnold Schoenberg. I want a good melody. I want to be able to hear a good tune. And Jonathan Harvey said, if you listen carefully, there are some lovely tunes by Arnold Schoenberg. What Arnold Schoenberg tried to say to the world was, I want to emancipate the dissonance. I want you to listen to dissonance and find value in it. We want to avoid harsh dissonances in our lives. But Schoenberg was saying, well, you know, perhaps we need a new look. Christ emancipated the dissonance of humanity's life by dying on the cross and rising in glory. He has emancipated the dissonance in the world, and we need to listen to that. Acknowledge the discords. This surely must be part of our evangelism. Face up to the struggles and the pains of the world. Don't imagine that they are easily got round, but live with them, acknowledge them. And finally, here's one that in recent days I've found very, very powerful. The importance of dwelling in silence. On the left, there's an image of the cloud of unknowing. On the right, 4 minutes, 33 seconds. This is a piece of music that was written by a composer called John Cage. It says, for any instrument or combination of instruments, signed John Cage. Has anybody ever been to a performance of this piece? You may not know that the idea is that if it's a pianist who's going to play it, the pianist comes in with the score, places it on the piano, and sits at the piano for 4 minutes and 33 seconds. What John Cage is trying to say, listen, what's going on? Do you know the story of Jesus meeting the Syrophoenician woman? And she said, heal my daughter. She was a foreigner outside of the Jewish territory. And Jesus said, I've not come to you foreigners, effectively. And then she pleaded with him. And then it says in the biblical reference, he said not a word. I think I'm beginning to recognize that as we listen to the sounds of the universe, our evangelism needs to make sure that we actively say nothing sometimes. We are so anxious to want to fill the silences with something when there is nothing to be said. And I think Jesus Christ, his new world, helps us to see that this is a positive thing, not a negative thing. Muteness is not the physical inability to speak, but an active and voluntary act of not saying, an active holding of oneself silent. And I finish by, I hope, reflecting what the cloud of unknowing is saying. That there is an unknowability about God. And that in some deep and mysterious way, we are being called to enter into a mystery that is like a cloud, but we are searching and listening for hints and references and echoes of Jesus Christ's song of love. If we think we can grasp it all, if we can get hold of it ourselves, then I think we are missing something of very deep profundity. And when John Robinson begins his Honest to God book by saying, get rid of the God up there, get rid of the God out there, look at the depths of your heart and ask yourself, are you genuinely seeking the love that has no end and no beginning?
Harvey, you said you were thinking aloud. Thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to share in your thinking. I don't know about other people, but you made me look at things in a different way and ask questions I can't find the answer to. So thank you very much. We have got a bit of time for questions, and Angela will run round with the microphone and mic. Could you make a point of, if you go on saying things after Harvey's responded, to speak into the mic so that the people watching online can hear?
Harvey, thank you again for that. As you were describing the relationship between Eric Fenby and Delius, my mind flashed back to a wonderful program Monica and I were watching last couple of nights. And that's Chris Packham with 4 remarkable people suffering from autism, and the ways in which Chris managed to unlock what was in these people and enable them to speak to their family, their friends, their workmates, their fellow students. And it was amazing how often music featured in all that. And I think perhaps a couple of them said how much music was tremendously important to them. And they each painted a picture of a sort of amazing, in one case, a sort of filmed picture with sort of sound and images of what was going on in his head, which he couldn't express because he was playing a part to fit in and be normal with the folk around him. But it was reminding the unlocking that music can achieve.
Is it taking it, Mike, too far to say that Jesus Christ has got the key that unlocks that the melody of Christ's love could be part of that unlocking?
Well, I sense that. When we talk about one of the roles of the Spirit is to unlock the prayers that we're trying to say, that are unutterable prayers.
Too deep for words, yes.
Quite extraordinary. What was it called, Mon? About the autistic mind, I think.
The autistic mind, yes. Thank you, Mike, very much. Thank you. Malcolm.
Thank you, Harvey. It's unlocked a lot of ideas and thoughts. Years ago, we were with a youth group in the wilds, so we put it that way. And we said to them, and they were all jabbering, and as we were walking, and somebody said, let's spend the next period of time as we walk through this forest. And at the end, we'll stop and tell each other what we've heard. And I can just remember one young said, you know, I actually heard a bird singing.
Yes.
He'd never heard, because when you're jabbering, you can't hear the birds sing. And I thought that was remarkable. And you gave me, as you were starting to talk, and we saw that picture of the universe, Val and I went with the children and the grandchildren out to a cherry farm down in the Cape in South Africa. There were no lights, but we just had the lamp lights in this a little home that we were occupying over the weekend. And as we went and sat outside, the Milky Way was totally exposed in the African sky. And I can, to this day, I can hear the children, the grandchildren, and their parents saying, "I've never seen this." And it was a remarkable, and as you were doing it, I was just thinking, if I may make this suggestion, somewhere in, is it Mark's Gospel says that a great time before day, Jesus went out to pray. And for me, Jesus, this man from Nazareth, whom I can model my life on, as inadequately as probably I do, I wonder in that time that he went out, when he was he listening? And could he hear the composer singing as he went about the divine business? I just thought, thank you. That was a lovely time tonight.
One of the questions, Harvey, which you asked was, I am on. Sorry. One of the questions, Harvey, that you asked was, where is God in all the chaos of our world? And my instinctive response was to give what I realize is probably a rather pat answer, which is, God is there in all the pain of Gaza. But then you made me go think beyond that and say, what do I mean by that? And how would I explain that to a non-believer? And I don't know. Over to you.
Well, yeah. I suppose my immediate instinct is to say not a word. But I think the fact that we raise the question is important, rather than to try and imagine that we have a straight answer for these questions. I don't know what one, I really don't know. I mean, I can only reiterate what I hope I've been trying to express to you, that there's something about the way God has poured himself. He's not only in this situation in Gaza, but he's actually poured himself into it. But how that is to be understood is part of our faithful discipleship, I think. I'm sorry, that's not a very adequate answer.
I was just, thank you again, Harvey. Just feels a bit inadequate saying thank you, but thank you nevertheless. I'll just be silent and that'll say much more. You mentioned at one point that Jesus ended religion and brought in a new world. And I'm just thinking to myself, I don't think, other than perhaps little snippets here and there, we've really at all appreciated what that world is. And 2,000 years of church history, it's almost that we've actually been trying to rebuild religion, which Jesus removed. And in some senses, then perhaps we've lost the plot in so many ways, and yet there are snippets that come through, and you're picking on them well, which is about what it's all about. So it's about living in the new world that has been created for us by Christ, and not keeping the old religion going, however that is defined. And just one little aside to the previous question. I was delighted that the Archbishop of Canterbury was able to admit to a mistake. I got it wrong, he said, and how great that is to hear that when he was willing to meet the Christian pastor from Bethlehem, because originally he thought that he might offend people by meeting that person. So one issue to issues like Gaza and so many of them around the world is we can't just bury our heads in the sand. We've got to get involved in it, but the right way to do it, well, we have to think.
I do remember, thank you, John. I do remember the time at the very early part of my ministry when a young child drowned in a swimming pool, and his mother said, well, why did God let that happen? And I couldn't give an answer. I just couldn't say anything. And she said, but you're a minister, you should know the answer. Well, of course, that's a reaction you would expect. But there is a sense in which it's the presence, sharing in being really present. And as we were talking about last week, about where is our body? Have we put our body in this place? Are we really listening to the issues of those who are suffering in Gaza? And next week, Doreen, we finish this series off by looking at the nature of the church today and how we try to live this out. These questions that I keep asking.
Any other questions? Harvey, you've given us just so much to think about. Thank you sounds very inadequate, but it's all I can say.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you all for coming.
And same time, same place next week, soundtracks of community.
Of the church, really, the body of the body of Christ and the church. Yes. Thank you.